Hey, everybody, welcome back to Conversations in Ken's Cafe. We've got a special guest, Scott Wilson, aka Gardener Scott. Gardener Scott, you've been doing this for a long time, 400,000 plus subscribers on YouTube, teaching and sharing your knowledge and understanding. I so much appreciate your taking the time today to come on and share today. So thank you very much for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I just love getting out and talking to people and talking subjects that always come back to gardening when it's me. And so I appreciate you asking me today.
Well, you've got so much knowledge that a lot of people don't have. Now, before I get into that, guys, if you don't know Gardener Scott, he's got certificates as a professional.
A
I can't,
master gardener.
a master gardener.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in gardening and really want to understand gardening, he is a voice that I would recommend anybody to take the time and watch because you're not going to get led astray. But with that being said, Scott, maybe you tell the people a little bit about what you understand and what you've learned in the last, say, just the last couple of years.
Uh, well, we don't have the 48 hours of nonstop talking that it would take me to share even a portion of what I've learned. The thing about gardening that I particularly enjoy is that it's always evolving. As you learn more about it, you find a different method, different technique of doing it, and that's one of the things I love. I love experimenting, trying new things, doing new methods. And so, in the last couple years, in particular, I've really tried to really delve deep into soil biology, the science behind gardening. There's so much gardening advice out there on YouTube based on old wives' tales and grandpa's anecdotes
Yeah,
and
we call it bro science.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and I have a basic tenet in my philosophy of gardening, which is that a good garden grows where a good gardener goes. And I
Mhm.
think often those tips and tricks from different people work, not because the actual suggestion has any validity, but it's because the person is trying to learn more about gardening. They're a good gardener. They're getting out there. They're trying new things. They're doing so many things right that when they do one of these things that's just simply a waste of time, it really doesn't matter that much because they're out in the garden doing the things that really
Mhm.
do matter. And so anecdotally, what has happened is a lot of good gardeners are trying these things and it seems to work. So they pass on that information. Well, being a master gardener, that it's all about research based information.
Mhm.
That's what the extension service is. That's what the master gardener program is all about. And so I try to learn as much as I can about the science, about new studies, about research.
Mhm.
And I just think it's fascinating. The more you learn about something as simple as putting a seed into the ground, the more amazing it becomes when you actually see the result of all of those efforts and your labors, quite literally, and of course, all the knowledge you've gained to get there.
Yeah. Well, and like you, as you said, like for myself, it's all about the biology. I took it right down to how everything grows, whether it's us or plants. It's all based on cell division because that's how your plant grows, whether it's a leaf or a
Mhm.
root. And in taking it to that level, it just blew my mind that this world exists that we don't really talk about, which is that cell division and how to make that healthy. And you're doing it by adding compost, by adding
Mhm.
structure for the biology to live on. And I know when you were on, we had you on with Leighton Morrison, you'd mentioned using biochar. um
Mhm.
have you ever heard the term quorum sensing?
I've heard the term. I think I read a little bit about it, but it's nothing I could speak to.
Well, you've heard of the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, Dr. David Johnson?
Yes, absolutely. I've been thinking about building one, but I've
Mhm.
got so much else of my garden. But yeah, the Johnson
Yep.
Sewer reactor, that was one of those things about 2 years ago that I delved deeply into, and
Yep.
uh, it's another one of those fascinating subjects.
Well, in one of his videos when I was studying it, he had mentioned quorum sensing, and his explanation basically was it's where you have an aggregate where enough biology can exist together that they can learn and grow, and they can literally create new biology that doesn't exist in the soil system to go out and mine your sand, silt, and clay. So this quorum sensing, I believe, when you put um, the biochar in, is a stable area where an aggregate can be broken through by a worm. So
Yeah,
it's like, yeah,
it's basically a scaffold.
yeah,
It's a platform for that soil biology for microbes
mhm,
and and at, I've been learning much more about the fungal activities in soil in the
mhm,
last year or two as well. Particularly with biochar, I used to think, and much of the research and the information about biochar is focused on the bacterial benefits of
mhm,
biochar. What I haven't seen, but I'm beginning to suspect, is the fungal benefits that biochar will bring into the soil, especially because of what you're talking about, the aggregation within the
mhm,
soil and the root structures, the exudates from the roots in the soil add to that as well. And so when you have the fungal activity, the bacterial activity, then you have the chemical activity from the plant itself with the root exudates.
mhm.
All of that is working to create the aggregates within the soil. And yeah, you're exactly right. That's why I advocate adding so much organic matter to soil,
Mhm.
particularly compost, because whether you have sand, silt, or clay, the soil will improve because of that aggregation that's developed by all of the biology. It's it is just fascinating.
Well, and that's why a lot of people talk about no-till. Um, and once you have an established bed that's really kicking ass with biology, then yeah, all you got to do is cut in and put a seedling in or a seed in, and the less you disturb, the faster everything meshes back together. It's like when you shave and you get you cut yourself, the razor is so sharp, it's just a little line that doesn't bleed for very long. Where you take a spoon to your face, you're in trouble.
Yeah,
And it's the same with our soils. The less we disturb, the better, but only once you've got it truly built. And in that way, adding that biochar, like if I bought a rototiller years ago and I don't use it, because I understand that once I have the biological built, I don't need to or want to break that up. I don't want to break those aggregates up because that's where everything the real life is.
exactly. And you raise such an important point that almost everybody is unaware of. It's the established soil. It's having that soil that is healthy, that's filled with life, that's filled with organic matter. Charles Dowding is the famous
Mhm.
UK gardener who has written the books on no-till gardening, and his videos and his books are great, filled with wonderful information.
Yeah.
I actually did a video, I think it's 4 years ago now, where I explain why I don't do no-till gardening. And the
Mhm.
reason is exactly to your point. Here in Colorado, my Colorado garden has less than 1% organic matter. It's
Mhm.
compacted soil. It has no life to speak of. And you can't just put a seed in that kind of soil and expect
Yeah.
anything to grow. You need to develop it. 5 years after having started the garden I'm at now, I'm now moving to no till methods because my soil has been built up and it has that organic matter, it has the soil life. Almost anywhere in my garden, I can pull aside the mulch and I can see the earthworms within a couple inches of soil. But 5 years ago, I had none of that. And
Yeah.
so, and that kind of gets back to that initial um, thought that I raised in our discussion, that people will see no-till gardening and how effective it is, and they'll think, "Oh, I need to go do that." And then they do it and have no success at all, because you need to build the soil. You need to have that foundational life that will support the growth of plants. And a tiller can actually work.
Mhm.
I have a tiller. I haven't used it in years, but the
Yep.
reason I have the tiller is that initial breakup of that terrible soil that is so
Yeah.
compacted, that has no life in it. It's okay to use a tiller in those kind of conditions to get the soil broken up, to get that organic matter mixed in. And then
Mhm.
beyond that point, uh, I don't even think I can get my tiller started if I wanted to. It's probably so gummed up and rusty on the inside. And that's actually a good thing. That when you have a tool like that you don't use, it shows that you're doing things right.
Yeah. Well, and you look at oh, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but it's all wood chips, right?
Yeah.
And he puts
The
several
back
feet.
to Eden gardening
Yes, back to Eden.
in the
And
Pacific Northwest.
yeah, it's amazing because all he's really done is he's speeding up Mother Nature's breakdown of organic material. And you have to have organic material for two things, both the components that exist at a molecular level, but it's a place for the biology to live.
Yeah,
And if you don't have that, and like in Colorado where you are, you had to add more and more of
exactly.
organic material. If you don't have it, you know, you're not going to have anything yet. At the same time, he's putting it on top, not putting it in the soil because it hasn't been charged with life yet. But it generally
Right.
takes a year for that kind of a system to really start working properly.
Yeah, and that's only part of the story, because he's known for the thick layers of wood chips that he
Mm.
uses. What's less known, and you'll find this in some of his tour videos and some of the informational videos he has, uh, he uses manure
Mhm.
as a supplement to the wood chips, and so
Yeah.
that's one of those things where that helps augment that life within the wood
Mhm.
chips, and then it also supplies some of the food as it breaks down. So the manure
Yeah.
will break down first, stimulating primarily the bacterial growth, and then the fungal activity will come in to help break up those wood chips. And the mixture of both the bacterial and the fungal activity is
Mhm.
lost on a lot of people. I know you're aware of Dr. Elaine Ingham,
Oh yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's a big aspect of her teachings, is
Mhm.
that you need a balance of both. And that's one reason why I use wood chips a lot in my landscape, particularly around my fruit trees and my perennial beds and my fruit bushes, because that brings in a fungal
Yeah.
activity that isn't going to be found if you just use compost as a soil amendment.
Well, I remember when I was growing up, you know, if you could get a mushroom growing in a farmer's field, you knew that things were going good. And for those of you that don't understand, a mushroom is actually the fruit of mycelium, which
Yeah,
is 100% fungal. And it's in the way our world was created. It all started with bacteria, but the later successional plants like our redwoods, etc., you have to have the fungally dominant, like your forest is 2500 uh, fungus to bacterial ratio, and that's what
yeah,
Elaine Ingham speaks of. And we've actually had her on with Leighton Morrison. They're actually quite good friends, and he worked with her at Rodale. So the knowledge that woman has got in her mind in the projects globally she has worked on, it is
yeah.
amazing. But even with Dr. Elaine, she's starting to realize now, after decades, that yes, you do have to have the bacterial. Because the guy, when I was speaking with Leighton one day, we were talking about predator prey, And
Mhm.
the bacteria is generally the prey species for the fungal, and without it the fungal can't, exist properly and be healthy. So it's got to be that biodiverse biology. It's got to have everything available to it.
Yeah. Well, and you know this because of your background and your interest in the biology, but simple gardeners don't necessarily understand all of that
Yeah.
because it's the bodies. It's actually those dying and dead bacteria
Hmm.
that will release the nutrients within their bodies
Hmm.
that is what's feeding the soil. And so when we talk
Yeah.
about feeding the soil, it's that interplay between all of these different species that are feeding upon each other.
Yeah.
And through the process of the feeding and the dying, that's what gives plants all the nutrients that they need to grow.
Well, and that's where organic material is so important, because that's the base components. That's the molecules of calcium, magnesium, boron, etc.,
Yeah.
are being broken down. And that's generally, most of that is done by bacterial. Like if you look at a compost pile, it's all bacterial to start,
Mhm.
to break everything down, get things going. And you're right, in the food sources of bacteria can promote the fungal growth. And that's where quorum sensing comes in, because it gets so much bacteria, it goes, okay, something else needs to be brought in. And Mother Nature went, oh, well, here's this breakdown of DNA, build this. And it gets built by the biology that exists there, using those components. And all of a sudden you have the next step and the next step and the next step. But if you don't have the first step, you can never climb the mountain to get to the fungally dominant that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's it's a time factor.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about this in one of my live streams last month, that when we talk about the most important aspects of building good soil, we talk about the compost, we talk about the bacteria and the fungal activity. But the point I raised in that particular live stream was that a factor that is often not considered is time, the amount
Mm-hmm.
of time it takes for that whole sequence to take over. And sure, the bacteria might be doubling every 20 minutes or so,
Yeah.
the but just because you've got a big booming population of bacteria does not mean your soil is suitable for growing a garden, because it's going to take, in most cases, years to reach the point that you could grow something and expect success. I had a video that I released yesterday. I grew peppers uh,
Mm-hmm.
that were Hungarian species with the intent to make an authentic Hungarian paprika. And
Okay.
so I grew half a dozen different varieties of Hungarian peppers. I harvested, I dried, I made paprika. That's what the video was about. But I had a comment this morning on that video from someone saying, how did you get your peppers to grow so big?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're they're big, beautiful, healthy fruits from my pepper plants. And the
Yeah.
answer was quite simply, I just put the plant into my amended soil,
Yeah.
because that soil has 4 years of amending and having all those populations reach an equilibrium, that all I have
Mm-hmm.
to do now is just put a plant in the ground and I get big, beautiful fruit without fertilizers, without tilling, without doing anything. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's like the razor on the face. You make a little slit in the soil, put the plant in, and nature takes care of the rest, because of the time component of all of those things working together and
Mm-hmm.
making a premium product, which is garden soil.
Exactly. And like a lot of people, like we talked about the biochar, and if you go back in the history where they're finding it in the Amazon, Terra Preta, and you look
Mhm.
back at some of the new discoveries, um, that soil that was created there Well, I don't want to get sidetracked because I have my own opinions on why it was created, but it's been there for so long. It can literally be mined.
Yeah,
I think it's 3 meters the one guy takes off every year, and then it comes back because the biology is literally making lignin, which feeds more biology and allows it to literally grow itself back. And when you
that's
get to that
incredible.
point in a garden, oh my God, do you need anything after that?
Well, yeah, you don't, and you actually, I know Leighton is real big about doing the testing of the soils.
Mm-hmm.
Soil testing becomes important as you finally reach a point of equilibrium, because if you do too much amending, you can actually create a nutrient imbalance,
Mm-hmm.
and now all of a sudden you've got too much nitrogen in your soil or too much of some of those other nutrients, which could hinder the plants. So yeah, it's cyclical, where you do a lot of work to build up the soil, but then at some point you do just sit back and literally enjoy the fruits of your labors, because the soil has reached a good point.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't have to take that long when you understand how to add the biology and the components necessary. So, like, you can start with a brand new soil, compost that new soil for 30 days with the right amendments, and all of a sudden you've got an alive soil to
Yeah.
start with to put in your bed. And instead of going, starting from scratch with just dead soil, you can start right from the very beginning with so much life that it's going to amaze you. Like, I tell people, you can't reach full genetic potential of a plant without a diverse biology and a diverse nutrient base. And that's where, the different amendments that you can put in, like, say, tomatoes, they love calcium,
Sure.
right? So you
Yeah.
want to add extra calcium. So look at Korean natural farming, how they make a foliar spray for adding calcium. So you can complement what you've done and what you're doing and have everything there. But if without the biology to use that, your plant is going to struggle. And
Yeah.
that's where, Scott, you've created your beds over years, and you're seeing now that it's like everything's already there. Do you generally add any foliar sprays to help it between,
No, I
vegetative
don't.
growth and flowering?
No, the soils, almost all of our soils, and actually I learned this from Dr. Elaine, most of our soil has all of the calcium, all the magnesium,
Mm-hmm.
all of the macronutrients that plants need, and most of the micronutrients that plants need. It just needs to be released, like you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. Once you have the soil life, the nutrients are available for the plants. So if the soil is good enough, then there really isn't a need for a foliar spray of any type. Now, the argument could be made that you could use a foliar spray as a pest uh,
Mm-hmm.
prevention. That some of the studies that have been done to show, one of the the old wives' recipes that actually has some validity is milk
Mm-hmm.
to as an antifungal spray on plants. But I've also seen some interesting studies that show that a healthy plant really doesn't succumb to pests or to disease. It's the weak plant
Yeah.
that is most susceptible. So if you can keep all of your plants healthy, then you don't need to put anything else to fight off pests or disease, or to
Mm-hmm.
to treat. This is my dog Mala,
Oh,
or
I'm
to
all.
treat the plants. So that's my focus, is all about
Yep.
the soil, and then I don't do anything else, because the soil is taking care of giving me those good healthy plants.
Yeah. And I'd like to just share with people this document right here. Now, this is basically, if you're taking soil courses, this is going to be in the first sections of your book. This is a soil analysis. It was a global one on sand. And if you look at the left, you look at all the different components that are in sand. And it's one of the main things that people would never think to add into a soil system is a certain amount of sand. And you have to consider with that sand, you're getting all these components, but you're also giving the biology another village to live in. Some
Sure.
biology is only going to want to exist on those sand particles. So don't be afraid to put in some sand, and it helps with drainage, etc.
Yeah, exactly. That it's that mineral component, and that's
Yeah.
the only time I use fertilizers really at all is in container gardening, where
Hmm.
I'm using a soilless mix primarily. And it's because of what you just showed. If there's no real soil, if there's no minerals from a sand based soil, then you have to artificially add those
Yeah.
nutrients. But within my garden beds, I'm using my native soil, which has a lot of sand in it. And you're
Yep.
exactly right. That's there. It just needs to be released.
Well, exactly. And it's that the people that release it, or I call them people because biology
The
is
creatures.
everything in our physical forms. Like, most people don't consider that we're built by cell division ourselves, and our biology, whether it's our gut biology or the biology that exists in our heart, that's what's rebuilding your cells for your heart muscles.
Mhm.
So if you don't have that biology, you got to get it, but get the nutrition. That's where, Scott, you do vegetables, etc. And well, one of the main things we're missing in our foods is those nutrients that aren't in our soils anymore. And you're putting all those components back in.
Mhm.
And that's what people have to realize. If you're eating food from Scott's garden, then you're going to get the nutrients. If you're eating food from most grocery stores, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get what is necessary for your body.
Yeah, it really is sad when you look into that aspect of uh, the 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 specific development of vegetables in particular for
Mhm.
the purpose of transportation to a store to then look pretty so that they can be purchased. And then when you do the analysis, the nutrients are essentially gone now
Yeah,
from much of the produce that is being grown uh, in uh, for our supermarkets. And I came across some research. I did a video on this subject last year where I talked about why the
mhm,
the stuff we buy in the store doesn't taste good and why it tastes so good in the garden. And it really
mhm.
comes from that. Not only are nutrients lost during the storage process, but also lost during the transportation process. But most importantly, they weren't there to begin with because of the plants that are being grown by these uh, organizational farmers.
Yeah,
And when you compare through the analysis of the nutrients what we have in our gardens, the taste components can be directly attributed to the nutrients. So the
yeah,
reason it tastes better is because it is literally better for us, and
yeah.
our bodies recognize that through our taste buds.
Well, like, my family had a 14-acre organic strawberry farm when I was young, and you would bite into one of those strawberries, and it would just like a burst in your mouth of flavor. But I
Yeah.
went to one place and I was selling, 5-gallon buckets, or no, ice cream pails of strawberries. And I gave one to a young woman, and she bit into it. And she says, "This doesn't taste right." She was so used to the cardboard
Yeah.
taste from a store. She didn't even understand what, good food was. It was just like, how do you deal with people like that, Scott?
Uh, I have some of those people occasionally that I'll encounter in one of my classes, or if
Mhm.
I'm out as part of like in my gardening club, we will have plant sale every year. So I'm always at the plant sale talking
Mhm.
to people about gardening, and that is just, it's sad. I do what I can to educate people along those lines, that what you are tasting, that you purchase from a store, is not the real taste. That
Yeah.
you have to grow it yourself, and you have to have that experience. And if you do that, if you are willing to put together even just a 5-gallon bucket and grow a pepper plant or a tomato plant and then taste it, you're sold. You're
Yeah.
going to recognize that it's a big difference. And even, the organic produce that we buy in the store is not as good tasting as what you can grow
No.
in your backyard. Organic, as you know, organic farming as a process, it it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're eating is going to be tastier or better than what you could do yourself in your backyard using the same process.
Well, and people don't understand. Like I was a truck driver for 20 years, and a lot of the food that you eat, um, they actually spray chemicals into the trailer because it was picked green to ripen it before it gets to this next store.
Yeah.
So you're eating stuff that looks good, but was never finished on the tree. It's never going to have the nutrient value. Like Andy Lopez, the invisible gardener, he uses a refractometer a
Mhm.
lot to check the Brix levels, to check the sugar content. The higher the sugar content, the more complex the molecule structure is. That's one of
Yep.
the reasons bugs don't eat healthy plants, is because they can't digest the
Yeah.
molecules of
Yeah.
sugar
It's
at
too
that
healthy.
level.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy, and you're right. The ethylene gas that's being pumped into to trucks and warehouses, and
Mhm,
you can see that. I was just talking to a gardener a few days ago that had to harvest some tomatoes because of a frost, and asking about ripening, and you could put it next to a banana and see that exact process at work in the way that the gases are released from a banana that will cause a tomato to ripen, and vice
mhm.
versa, because tomatoes will release the same gas. And so scientists figured that a long time ago. And yeah,
Yep.
the tomato will ripen if it receives the right kind of gas, but that's not going to change the flavor because it hasn't matured. It's just
Yeah.
a an immature tomato that has changed color, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. The skin is oxidized and changed color, but inside it hasn't matured yet. It's
Yeah.
it's so discouraging in some ways that that my wife watched the video where the kids went out to the farm and they were going, well, why doesn't the farmer just go to the store and buy food? Why is he raising it? It's like they don't realize that food comes from a farm, is actually grown and brought into the store. They think
Yeah.
it's just always in the store.
Yeah. I have a story to share with you. I'm gonna back up here for just a second. I hear my
Okay.
puppy chewing on something she shouldn't chew on. So
Okay.
uh,
You take care of that,
I'll
Scott.
be right back, and then I
Yep.
want to share that story with you.
Okay. So guys, just to let you know, we have James White on again with Leighton on Monday. And sorry about Wednesday, guys. Andy was really sick, so we didn't do the show, but we'll be doing that show again. Hopefully, he'll be feeling better this coming Wednesday. But welcome to everybody new. Food Forest Permaculture. Hey, Rory, Adam, Jay. When you were mentioning the quorum sensing earlier in your comment, was that a video that you were talking about that people can go watch? If you could put that into the chat, because that quorum sensing is something that's very important to understand for people that are growing and gardening. So. And there's Scott back. He just has to take his mute off. There we go. What's your
Yeah.
story, Scott? Tell me a story, brother.
Yeah. So I about 10 years ago now was hired by a school district to create a huge school garden, 24,000 square feet of growing space, a 42-foot dome greenhouse. And it was nothing when I started. We built 105 raised beds and planted fruit trees, just an expansive space of food grown
Mhm.
for the school. And the students had an opportunity. It was a middle school, so preteens primarily. The students had an opportunity to work in the garden and actually um, grow from seed and reach harvest and then eat it as part of their lunch. And so one day in particular, there were two girls. It was the equivalent here in Colorado Springs of like an inner city school. It was in the
Mhm.
middle of a food forest or a food desert.
Mhm.
And so everything everybody ate came from a fast food restaurant or the store. And
Yeah.
so these two girls, I think they were like 11 and 12 years old, were harvesting carrots, and the one girl picks up the carrot and looks at it, and she's, kind of looking at me like, wait a minute, what's going on? And she said, I didn't know carrots came from the ground. And I mean, it was one of those confusing moments in her life. She's like, she sees it, but she doesn't understand what she sees. And then the
Mhm.
other girl, because it's part of the education, I would allow them to eat anything they harvested. All they had to do was just wash it off and they could eat it. And there were some things that never made it into the school kitchen. A lot of things never made it to the school kitchen. But the other
Jeez.
girl is standing next to her with a carrot, eating it, and says, I know. I didn't know they came from the ground either. And I hate carrots, but I would eat this all day long.
Oh, yeah, it's so sweet.
Yeah, it's just, the kids in particular, they just need to be exposed to these
Mhm.
foods, and they're not being exposed to the foods, and they don't know where the food comes from. They don't know that carrots are coming from the ground. They don't understand why a farmer wouldn't just go to the store and buy the food. But
Mhm.
once they find out, I love getting my grandkids in the garden, because once they try something, that's all they want to do is try more. At the
Yep.
school, I told kids this was kind of a, a one of my plans to deal with the weeds. But I told the kids that every part of a dandelion is edible, and they didn't believe me. So I
Mhm.
dug up a dandelion and passed around the leaves for them to taste, and passed around the flower for them to taste, and passed around the roots for them to taste. And I didn't have to worry about weeding dandelions ever again, because the kids would dig up dandelions so they could eat the dandelions.
Mhm. Have you ever dried out the root for tea?
I have, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
and we have dandelions in this country because they were brought over from Europe as a food source. So,
Mhm.
it's one of those things that there's a lot of things in our landscape that make actually pretty good tea. I have stinging
Yeah.
nettle that I grow, and harvested a whole bunch of stinging nettle a couple months ago for tea. I love
Yeah.
the stinging nettle tea. And then of course, a lot of the teas that you buy uh, in the tea and coffee section, you can grow many of those things in
Mhm.
your own garden. You might not be able to actually grow the tea plant if you're
Yeah.
living in most of the United States. But all those other herbal teas, grow those same plants. You can grow mint and make a wonderful mint
Mhm.
tea. You can grow echinacea and make a wonderful echinacea tea. Uh, all those teas that you're spending a lot of money on, you can buy seeds for a fraction of the cost and never have to buy tea again.
Well, I wanna point out, I love stinging nettle tea. It's one of the most nutritious plants on earth,
Yeah,
and that's one of the keys, guys, is by drinking that tea, you're getting those different components into yourself, into your own body that your cells need. So, drinking those types of teas, especially Scott, you're growing it yourself.
yeah.
That's this that extra nutrition that's in that product that you've created that you're ingesting. That's where it's so much better and healthier for you to drink that than to go to a store and buy it. So guys, if
Yeah.
you can, grow things yourself.
And just like we are talking about with the vegetables in the produce section,
Mhm.
the tea tastes so much better
Yep.
when you grow and make it yourself. It's good when you buy it from a reputable company, but it's so much better when you actually make it yourself. Celestial
Yeah.
Seasonings is just up the road from me in Boulder, Colorado, and I've taken the tour of their factory a
Mm.
number of times. It's a wonderful tour to see how they actually make the tea. But by the time they buy their material, because everything they have is being shipped in from all over the world, and
Mhm.
then it's dried, and then it's packaged, and then it's transported, and then it goes to the store, and then it sits in your cupboard, and then you make a tea with it. It could be a year or more old by the time you
Yep.
ever make a tea, and the flavor has definitely dissipated. But when you can go out to your own garden and harvest some flowers and bring them in and make a fresh tea, it's incredible the difference in the flavors.
Well, it's just like, the girl that said, "Well, I don't like carrots," until she
Yeah,
tasted it. And it's like, I could eat this all day. It's just there's so much difference in a healthy plant compared to or a fresh plant compared to something that's been through the ringer for months upon months before it ever gets to you.
yeah. And Hillbilly Herb is talking about growing lemon balm and chamomile, of course, both of
Yep.
which are in my garden. I did a video a couple years ago showing how to make chamomile tea, and and when you make a tea from the fresh flowers, it's even different than a tea you make from the dried flowers, the same flowers of the same plant,
Mhm.
but the structure of the chemicals during the tea making process and just the depths of flavor, just amazing. I love fresh chamomile tea, chamomile flowers to make a tea. It's something that everybody should do because it is
Yep.
incredible.
Well, and that's the one thing about growing. Like I've got rosemary growing upstairs, and I brought it in. It's outside during the summer, and then we brought it in for the winter. But we can pick that at any time to add fresh into a dish. It's so much more available to you fresh than it is when it's been frozen or it's been dried. That life, that biology is still existing there. And then you take that biology into your body, just like biology in your garden needs to be biodiverse. Well, it needs to be the same with you, or else you can't be
Yeah.
healthy. So, Scott, I appreciate that you're doing that and showing your
Oh,
children, your
thanks.
grandchildren, how to do that and how to get that into their bodies, because they're going to be healthier. They're going to be more
Yeah.
vibrant and alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and my kids have a daughter and a son.
Mhm.
Were not interested in helping me in the garden at all as they were growing up. They were teenagers by the time I actually really started having
Mhm.
a deep interest in gardening. But now that they're parents, both of them have that interest. They know from my history and my lessons just how beneficial it is to grow your own crops. And my son in particular is really learning a lot and trying some new things
Mhm.
because it's important when you recognize that and you start having kids of your own that you want to do as much from a health perspective as you can. Gardening is a big part of it.
Well, being out in the fresh air, in nature, in sunlight, getting your hands dirty, getting your fingers in the dirt. Most people don't realize that, when you put your hands in that dirt, biology is coming in through your
Yeah,
skin cells into your body, and you can be so much healthier because you have your hands in compost with all that biology. And like Scott, you mentioned earlier, when the biology is consumed, it's releasing those nutritional components into the mixture that happens in your body as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's so important for your kids and your grandchildren and yourself to be out there having your hands in the dirt, because then you're not only teaching and showing and sharing, but you're creating a flow of energy and love through yourself to your plants, to the children when they consume the plants. People don't think of the energetic flow as well as the physical flow, but when Scott, when you give your, your child or your grandchild, say a pea, and they crack that pea open, they start
Yeah.
popping those in. You grew that with love, and
Oh,
part of that
absolutely.
love is taken in by your grandchild.
Yeah, and that's actually the perfect example because that's my one granddaughter. That's her favorite activity is to come to the garden and go straight to the pea plants and pull off the peas and eat fresh. And
I
so,
like her. I
yeah, I
like
mean,
her.
it that really is her favorite thing to do. And if the pea plants aren't growing, she asks, "Where are the peas?" And particularly in my hot, windy, dry summers, I'm not growing peas during the middle of the summer, and that's often when they're coming for a visit. But any other time of the year, absolutely. And also it's developing their interest. They don't even realize it yet. So my granddaughters visited a couple days ago, and we're out in the garden. And this is actually a picture of my garden behind me. I just took this last week. Had a frost, so the pumpkin plants and the
Yep.
squash plants are dying and mostly dead now and need to be cleaned up. I've got some other plants that are covered to keep growing, but far behind me in this back bed, I have the cool season plants, the
Yep.
cabbage, the spinach, the radish, the beets, the carrots. Those can handle cold weather without dying.
Mhm.
And I, quite honestly, in taking care of all these plants, hadn't really thought about it until my granddaughters came this week. And they went straight to that bed and they're talking to each other and
Mhm.
saying, "These are the plants we started from seed." And they were. 6 months ago, they were in the garden putting seeds in that bed to grow
Mhm.
some of those plants. And again, 3 months ago, they as part of succession planning put some of the seeds in that bed. And that was the primary thought on their mind when they came to the garden was those were their plants.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they asked about harvesting and eating, and I said, "Oh, absolutely. That's what you do. That's why you put those seeds in the ground so that you can eat the fruits of your labor."
Exactly. And that connection, it's amazing when you see their faces and they make that connection, and it's like
Yeah,
their whole aura just lights up with, yeah, I did this. I love this.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's incredible. I love it. So gardening isn't just for me. It's definitely for my family and lots of other people in my life.
Well, you have over 400,000 subscribers, so I guess we'll have to call them all your family, Scott,
Yeah,
because
it is. It's a
yep.
community. I talk a lot about that on my Monday morning live streams. It
Mhm.
really is a big Gardner Scott community from all over
Yep.
the world. I have regular viewers and that I think of as friends from
Mhm.
Scotland and Wales and Australia and South Africa and Chile and Canada, of course, and all
Yep.
over the United States. And, have never personally met with any of these people, but they're friends and they're family
Yep.
because of this community and because we're on the same gardening journey and experiencing a lot of the same things.
Well, and that's why I like to put this one up is, remember, it's all about caring, sharing, and community.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, the other one I like to put up, Scott, is this one, and because you're a lit candle, but one lit candle can light many without ever diminishing its own light. And as long as we keep talking about this and being lit candles, we can light other people with this
Absolutely.
knowledge and understanding. So don't ever hesitate to share, guys. Like, get out there, share with your friends and your family.
Absolutely. And the sharing is so important. I I mention every opportunity I get to do exactly that. As a gardener, you should be sharing your gardening knowledge with others. Even
Mhm.
if it's a more experienced gardener, they're going to learn from your experiences. And if they aren't an experienced gardener, they're definitely going to learn from your experiences. But just all the different journeys we're on, that at least in my case we're talking about today, it's biology and soil. But I was in the store a few days ago, and I love when people that have seen my videos come up to me and say, "You're Gardner Scott." And so I'll stop and we'll talk for a little bit. And there was a man, Steve was his name, and he stopped me at the store and he shared with me that he first found my videos a couple years ago because he was undergoing cancer treatments,
Mhm.
and he was binge watching YouTube videos because he wasn't able to do anything else as he was fighting the cancer. And now
Mhm.
it's in remission. He's feeling better. He's out. He saw me. He came up. We started talking. And that sharing from him to me meant everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the highlight of my day, highlight of my week. I'm sharing it with you now because that's
Thank
how
you.
important sharing a simple
Yeah.
story can be for other people.
Yeah. And you do this. I know you put a lot of work into your videos to make sure that you're sharing the right knowledge with people. And he appreciated that. I appreciate that. A multitude of globally appreciate what you do and how
Oh,
you
thank
do
you.
it, Scott, because you're real. And that's a lot of people on YouTube aren't real. They put on this persona of everything is absolutely perfect and nothing ever goes wrong, but that's not the truth. You need to show your failures as well as your successes, because with that failure, I can go, "Oh, well, I don't want to do that because that's
Exactly.
not good."
Yeah, failures can lead to so many important lessons. That's one reason why I've got no problem showing this picture of my garden with dead
Yeah.
plants behind me, because that's the reality. In Colorado, when you have a freeze, it's going to kill your plants.
Yeah.
And so many of the most popular YouTube gardening channels are from Southern California or South Carolina, places where it just looks pretty all the time, and they're not showing what I think is the reality for so many of us. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've got videos that talk about the things that went wrong
Yep.
and things that I learned from. And thank you for saying that. I do try to be real,
Mhm.
and the people that meet me in a store, the person that they're meeting is the same person I am on YouTube as well, because I've got nothing to gain by
Yep.
falsifying any information or trying to make my garden look better than it is, because there's a lot of times it doesn't look very pretty at all.
Well, I know I have a series on the channel where I was growing cannabis and a few other things. And what I did is I made sure things were lousing up. I let powdery mildew get way out of hand and, et cetera, et cetera. But I never hid that from people. I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do to fight against this.
Mhm.
I ended up, I screwed up because I was doing a heat treatment and I was doing the second round and I had to go to town. So I turned the temperature, cranked it right up to, I was dealing with some spider mites to kill a spider mite larvae. And I had forgotten to water
Oh
before
no.
I left. And I cooked everything. It was like, except for the rosemary. One,
Okay.
one rosemary plant survived, but I showed everybody this is what
Yeah.
happened, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I've showed that too. I had a couple years ago. I start all my tomatoes and eggplants and tomatoes from seed indoors,
Mhm.
and in the 72 cell trays. And so
Yeah.
I had an entire tray, 72 cells. I usually put 2 seeds per cell, and then we'll split them when they get big enough. So
Mhm.
almost 150 pepper plants, and had them on a heat mat
Mhm.
because they will germinate and begin the initial growth much better in a warm soil.
Yep.
And same kind of thing. I had turned up the heat mat just after those seedlings had germinated, and so I pretty much had 150 little baby plants. I wanted the soil nice and warm, and then the next day things just got away from me. I didn't water, I didn't turn down the heat, and I came back to find 150 dead, fried
Yep.
pepper plants. And I showed it, took pictures, talked
Yep.
about it, because if you can, like you and you sharing your story, if you can keep from walking away during a heat treatment, or if you can not forget to water, then you're not going to have the same issues that both of us have
Yeah.
had with dead plants.
Yeah. It's really amazing because people can go back in our videos and see what we did, how we loused up, but we don't like, I don't care. I just want to show you what can happen, what
Right.
I was doing to solve problems. But I'm not afraid of saying, like, I'm not a gardener. I grown, amazing cannabis plants because that's the medication I use. That's how I found out it's all about the biology, is because I wanted the healthiest medication. But without the injuries, accidents, etc., I've went through, I would have never had
Right.
the time. Like you were saying, the gentleman with the cancer had to basically sit on YouTube because he had nothing better to do. I've had that experience for the last 15 years that's allowed me to dive down rabbit holes, move the brush around the bottom, and go, oh, there's a wormhole. Let's go there. Let's see
Yeah.
what's down there. I've
Yeah.
had the time to explore and experience and learn from Gardner Scott because I have watched your channel. My wife watches your channel as well
Oh,
as
nice.
many others.
Yeah.
But, we give so much so other people can go, oh, I don't want to make that mistake.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's
And like
that's the
Lily
benefit
says,
that
keeping it real.
it's keeping it real. And
Yeah.
the benefit of being retired as I am is that I do have the time to go
Yep.
down those rabbit holes and find a subject and research it as deeply as possible as one can do on their own laptop, uh, and then save somebody the
Mhm.
dozens or hundreds of hours from doing the same thing themselves by
Yeah.
presenting the research based information. A lot of times it's my own research that
Yep.
found the studies, and then share it. And one of the nice things too, this is just been a fascinating part of being a YouTube channel that has had this success. The Oregon State University earlier this year released a study on uh, the the wood that is being used in garden, pressure treated wood specifically.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so almost 2 years ago, they actually the team from Oregon State University contacted me and asked if I wanted to help them out with this study that they ended up
Mhm.
publishing. I think it was in February. And I took samples from all of my beds because some of my beds have pressure treated wood, some of my beds have raw wood with no treatment, some of my beds have a
Mhm.
combination of both, because I'm all about the experimenting and seeing if
Yep.
one works better and how effective they are. And so I gave them soil samples from all of my beds, and then we stayed in touch. And I haven't released the video. I've done 3 different videos, but I just don't like the content. So
Mhm.
eventually I'll do a video, because they sent me footage of them doing all their research and actually
Mhm.
doing the soil analysis. It's fascinating stuff. But what they found out was that pressure treated wood is perfectly fine to use in the garden. It's not leaching harmful chemicals.
Mhm.
And the amount of copper that does get released within like half an inch of the wood is what plants are going to be using anyway, because copper is a necessary nutrient for plants. So it's all good. But to be part of a study like that and actually seeing the behind the scenes and in my own backyard garden, of course, they had many other samples from other soils and a number of other
Mhm.
places. But I just love that. And I mean, that really enabled me to go down the rabbit hole of the chemicals that are being used in wood to help fight off some of the decay that would naturally occur. And copper based compounds are the primary chemicals that are being used, but it's okay. And there are so many people out there who say, oh, I would never use pressure treated wood in my
Yeah.
garden because of the fear that something could happen without ever really going into the research and
Mhm.
not seeing the actual soil analysis that
Yeah.
was done by a university. And so, that was just one of the many rabbit holes that I've been able to be part of that is now I did do a video where I talked about pressure treated wood. I didn't show the footage from Oregon State University. But that's what I talk about in that video was that here's
Mhm.
the science.
Yeah.
And of course, I got a lot of comments from people who don't trust the science, who don't want to believe me when I say trust the science. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Everybody can have their own opinion, but I like to trust the science.
Well, I think, and I know it's always been my fear. It's like what Silly Lily says. What about what shouldn't be used is the old railroad ties with creosote,
Exactly.
creosote, or however you
Yeah.
pronounce it.
Yeah,
But
creosote
today's,
is actually in California, which is labeled a lot of things as carcinogens, but creosote is a carcinogen. I mean, there's research that shows creosote can cause cancer,
Mhm.
and the thing about I have used railroad ties in my garden, but I've used the railroad ties that are so old that
Mhm.
they're dried and breaking, and all the creosote essentially has leached out uh,
Mhm.
years before.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that, yes, the chemicals in creosote can damage your skin, it can damage your health, and it could potentially, at a cellular level, cause cancer.
Yeah.
But particularly the old railroad ties, if the creosote is so damaging that it would harm you, it's going to harm your plants. And so
Yeah.
if you've got a bed made from old railroad ties and the plants are dying, yeah, there's still creosote in that wood, and you probably should not be using it in your garden.
Yeah. And that's where composting is able to break those molecules apart. That's what the biology is designed
Yep.
to do. This is where a lot of people, I know Leighton talks about a story where his backyard got sprayed by Roundup that killed everything. So what he did is he went to a farmer friend and had him send weeds that grow right on the edge of the field that's always been used, had Roundup used,
Mhm.
and he took the biology by shaking the dirt off, but that biology is actually growing to break those molecules down. He used that, sprayed it in his yard, and all of a sudden his yard was growing again because those molecules were broken down. There's too much fear,
Yeah.
but it's based on reality because that stuff is bad for you. It causes a lot of problems, but you can have it removed with the
Yeah.
biological content that breaks those molecules down. Mother Nature, if it's on our planet, she's dealt with those molecules before. She's designed the biology that'll break that apart. We
Yep.
just have to supply that biology.
Yeah, the way the science, the soil science, it's all about the biology, and the bacteria will buffer all of those hazardous compounds to and you do that analysis, and in time it dissipates and is no longer a problem. And
Mhm.
it's incredible. Just in your own backyard, sure, you can look up some of the studies of some of the research with radioactivity and with petrochemicals and the bacteria that is actually able to break down some of those hazardous components.
Mhm.
But even just naturally occurring soil in your own backyard can have those same impacts if you bring in something that's contaminated.
Yeah.
The potential. I like to use straw in my garden as a mulch. It's
Mhm.
readily available. It's very effective. I'll mix it with crushed leaves and dried grass typically, but there is the possibility that straw could be contaminated with an herbicide,
Yeah.
primarily the aminopyrrolid family of herbicides. There could be residue, but that's temporary. If
Yeah.
if it's exposed to the sun and the rain and the soil bacteria, all of those potentially hazardous residues are dealt with. And so it
Yeah.
really isn't as big an issue with time, as I mentioned
Yes.
before. It takes time for that to happen, but that the fear overwhelms people so that they don't even consider some of those options that might be beneficial in their garden by letting Mother Nature do what Mother Nature does, which is
Yeah.
just miraculous.
It's what that bacteria does. It just breaks it all down, creates, other biology, creates living spaces for other biology, but it's all components. Like everything in my body is just molecules. It's like there's gold, there's calcium, there's boron, all of these components that exist around us make up our bodies, make up the body of our plants, our animals. And if consider if you don't have those, then all of a sudden you get sick because you're out of balance. But if you have too much, like you said, Scott, you get out of balance on the other direction.
Yeah.
So Mother Nature loves balance.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I refer to a garden equilibrium,
Mm.
uh, and and that's basically a balance with Mother
Yeah.
Nature. And so I really saw this at the school garden. It was incredible, uh, with pests. And
Mhm.
I do a lot of things. I follow integrated pest management as a process for dealing with pests. I don't use the chemicals.
Yeah.
I use methods like encouraging predatory insects to come in and
Yeah.
deal with the insects that might feed on my weak plants, not my healthy plants, but my weak plants.
Yeah.
And so at the school garden, over a course, I apologize for my puppy.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
at the school garden, I saw this in the third year I was there. We had some terrible infestations, particularly with harlequin bugs. And we had so many plants and so many beds. It wasn't that big an issue, but it was noticeable how many insect pests we had.
Yep.
The fourth year, almost nothing,
Mhm.
almost no pests at all. And that was because at the 4 year point, all those flowers that I had planted, all those grasses that I'd planted, all of those herbs that I'd planted with the intent of developing a beneficial insect population,
Yeah.
they were all growing throughout the growing season and they were blooming and they were providing food and housing for the beneficial pests.
Yeah.
And I never had to deal with the pests again
Mhm.
because nature took care of it for me. I didn't even have to think about using chemicals, and I have that now in this garden. All around me, the gardeners this year complained about the grasshopper infestations and all the grasshoppers they had and how the grasshoppers devastated their plants. I'm within 5 miles of all of these gardeners in my garden club who had terrible grasshopper issues.
Yeah.
At the middle of the summer, I could probably count on one hand the number of grasshoppers that I had seen in my garden. And
Yeah.
and it's that basic concept of when you figure it out and you're able to work with nature, gardening is actually so easy at that point because there's no fertilization, there's no pesticides, there's no special tips or tricks. You just put the seeds and the plants in the ground and you step back and enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, and I know like we've given away Leighton's chorus, and that's he does teaches Hugo culture,
Mhm.
where he's actually putting the seeds in once the process is along, but then it's all natural, it's all full of life and vitality, and that's the problem. Most of our soils are literally dead. Like
Yeah.
Dr. Lane calls it dirt because it's
Yeah.
just a dirty word.
Yeah.
Living soil, you add the life, and all of a sudden you have that vibrant energy in your garden, that your plants are just, they're bigger, they're, you know the color is so much deeper, they're a blue green, not just a green, and there's
Yeah.
just vibrancy there.
Absolutely. The and far behind me, I have an area that's one of my newer areas. It's only 3 years old, but I follow a modified hugelculture process,
Hmm.
and in my beds where I bury logs and sticks and branches and pine cones and pine needles underneath in the lower half of the beds. But that back section this year, like you had mentioned earlier, filled with mushrooms, just absolutely a carpet of mushrooms in early spring in all of those beds. And
Hmm.
that just, I just loved seeing that. I was feeding the mushrooms, um, by all that wood that I had buried. That mycelial network was decomposing that buried wood, and I made sure that I was watering the
Hmm.
soil, like Jay is saying, become a soil farmer.
Yeah.
I was farming my soil. It was too early in the season for me to put any of my tomatoes or peppers in the ground yet, but I was tending to those beds to keep that fungal network alive and thriving,
Hmm.
because that's going to benefit my soil in the long run.
Well, and that's the point, is keeping it alive, because it is alive. People don't get that concept in their minds, that that soil, literally, if you put it under a microscope, there's all this life there. They're just thinking it's dirt, they're just going to walk on it. And you've discovered the secret of, it's the life in the soil that grows your plants. And it's so refreshing to
Yeah.
listen to you describe it in the ways that you do.
Oh, and I'm not sure if you've seen some of this information. I just discovered it recently. Some relatively new research, and I can't think of the sources off the top of my head, but a a a beginning of an understanding of the importance of plants in that cycle. And so
Mhm.
we know that all of that microbiology is important for the plants, but we're learning so much more as to the plant's role in that microbiology. And that, the one paper I read actually, um, put forth an idea that the plant may be more important for the microbiology then the microbiology is important for the plant. And it's because of the root zone, because of the exudates that are coming from the roots that the microbiology is feeding upon, and that it then get moved through the soil. And so uh, I have beds now that I will be clearing for winter. But I think having plants growing at every possible moment through the
Mhm.
year is important, even if it's not a plant that you're going to harvest, but to have a plant in the soil for the benefit of the soil is
Yeah.
just so important that we're just now beginning to learn more about that within our home gardens.
Well, like I like to tell people, more roots in the soil is one of the keys, because you consider a leaf structure, it's doing different things, whether it's drawing in photons of light energy, it's taking those photons, taking that energy, creating those exudates. Like I agree to a certain extent with what you just said and the research that's being done, but they haven't taken it far enough,
Yeah.
because if you really look at it, is there's literally little factories in your leaf that they need the energy, then they take the components. It's the biology that's creating the exudates. The plant, it's like, okay, take yourself, Scott. You got a heart in there. You go, okay, I need this many molecules. I need this many
Yeah.
molecules because I need to make a new heart cell. No, the biology says, oh, I need to make a new heart cell. So they're right in the importance of the biology in the biological side, but they're not looking at it that the plant isn't the apartment building for the biology, just like we're to the apartment building for the biology, but we're not in control.
Oh, no.
Other than what I put in my mouth, to digest, to give the molecules to my body to use, but it's the biology that's in control of it all.
Yeah.
Without that, there is no cell, there is no life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so incredible to, you know, uh, and that's why I had, talking about the holes we go down to find out this information, because
Yeah,
yes, and I fully support someone who doesn't know how to garden. They buy a pack of seeds, they put the seeds in the ground, they water it, they take care of it, and that's as simple as it needs to be.
yeah,
But if you really want to get to the point where it becomes a passion and you are maximizing your efforts, it's the biology above
yeah,
the soil and below the soil. The more you understand how a plant grows and how the soil grows, the
yeah.
better gardener you will be.
Well, have you ever heard of the S phase of cell development, Scott?
I'm not sure that I have the S phase.
Yeah, it's everybody, like when I was researching to try to figure out how plants grow, everything was going into RNA and DNA, but before that, there's the what's called the S phase. That's when the cell decides it's old enough, it needs to divide, right?
Okay.
It needs to come up with basically two things. It needs to come up with the workforce to build the new cell, the workforce that is going to go along with that as when it splits, because now you have two.
Mhm.
But then there's all the components that are necessary. Now, if the cell doesn't have the biology or the components, it can actually stop cell division for a certain amount of time. If it doesn't stop, it becomes, in our human body, we call them rogue cells.
Okay.
But this is where I came up with it's all about the biology, because the biology is the workforce that builds and maintains the cell itself. But then the components, the calcium, the boron, etc., the biology is the one that's actually breaking that for our plants out of sand, silt, clay, organic material in our bodies. It's our gut biome for whatever we eat. So it's the biology that creates the components. It's the
Mhm.
biology that moves the components through to where they're not needed to be to build the new cell. So at the root of everything, it's literally all about biology. That's the foundation of life on our planet. That's where you're saying that, people need to focus on that aspect. And that is so true, whether it's your health, your animal's health, your plant's health, this planet's health. If we keep destroying our biology with the pesticides and the herbicides, by taking the chemicals into our own bodies, whether that's an antibiotic, it's
Mhm.
killing biology. So if you've taken an antibiotic, you need to replenish the biology in your body to get back to balance and
Absolutely.
get to health. The S phase is the core of life on our planet.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it really is, whether it's an animal or a plant or any other
Mhm,
type of organism, that we should recognize that. I talk about when I improve my soil, but I'm also doing it from my own personal health perspective. When we add compost to the soil, it's organic matter, it has all
mhm.
kinds of nutrients. But if the compost we're using is and I use the pizza analogy. If it's a cheese pizza, if all you
Yep.
have in your compost is one ingredient, then you're really limiting the nutrients that you can provide to your soil. So I like to
Mhm.
make my compost a combination pizza
Yeah.
where I have, the pepperoni and the sausage and the onions and the olives and the peppers. And that's my compost. My compost is tomato plants and banana peels and rotten apples and leaves from the squash plants and whatever else I have. It's a combination pizza. But
Mhm.
but within my own body, I do the same thing for my own gut biome.
Yep.
I eat as many different fruits and vegetables as I can to help feed all of the different bacteria. I was doing some research earlier this year in that by feeding different bacteria within your body, you will have different impacts as those bacteria populate your body. And I think that whole concept is
Yep.
fascinating, whether it's your own body or whether it's a garden soil. Just have diversity as you're dealing with all of that biology. And it it's a monoculture is not a good thing in the garden world, and eating the same thing from your couch is not a good thing.
Exactly. Like I'm allergic, or well, when I was younger anyway, it was found out that the preservatives they were putting into the foods, and this is going back into the 60s, was having an effect. So I grew up organic. We didn't go to the store and buy
Good.
things, so I never had to experience it. But nowadays, that those chemicals are in everything that we
Yeah.
consume, other than if you're growing at home organically, following the principles that Scott teaches, right? You're going to get healthy food, which is going to put the biology, the nutrients into your body. And that's the key. It's having that biodiversity in your garden, puts the biodiversity in your plants that you're consuming, so you're getting the biodiversity.
Absolutely. And I also I like to preserve my food as well so that I don't have to go to the store. I
Mhm.
refuse literally to buy a tomato from the store. I refuse.
Yeah.
I haven't bought a tomato in years
Mhm.
for flavor and all the other things we've been talking about. And so I'll preserve everything that I can, like the
Mhm.
paprika that I mentioned earlier that I did the video on this week. But uh, fermentation has become my favorite method of having a relatively fresh tasting
Mhm.
food that I grew
Yep.
myself. I do a lot of dehydrating and freeze drying, but for the actual biology component, adding those probiotics from fermented food that you made yourself, not only does it taste incredible,
Yep.
but that adds another one of those components to
Yep.
actually improve our health.
Well, and like that's where fermentation, people need to realize it's broken down, it's more bioavailable into our bodies. That's where it's so important, when you're growing your own, to do things like make sauerkraut and
Yeah.
things like that, because it is broken down. Like we've had shows where we've talked about the different sizes of the organic compounds. You've got GOM, ground up organic material, right down to mineral associated. But when you put it into a liquid form and it's broken down to that point, your body just sucks it up. It's like if you're sick, you want chicken soup,
Yeah.
right? Because
It's
those
immediately available.
components, exactly, and
Yeah.
so easy and so healthy for you too.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the first videos I did, I think it was I've been making videos on YouTube for uh, about 12 years now. I think it is, maybe more than that. And one of my very first videos was on how to make sauerkraut. In addition to being a master gardener, I was certified as a master food preserver, and so I used to teach
Cool.
classes in preservation. And so when I started making videos on gardening, it was just for me a natural progression to also make videos on things like fermenting and preserving food. But that was one of my first videos actually that went over 1 million views that on how to make sauerkraut.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there that are interested in how to do these things and just don't know where to find information. And that's where the Gardner Scott channel comes in, because I'm I was there once and I want to try to make it as easy as possible for people to
Yep.
find some of that stuff. And I did not eat sauerkraut growing up, and I never added sauerkraut to my hot dogs when I was at a restaurant because
Mhm.
I didn't like the taste of sauerkraut. That stuff that they say is sauerkraut, I have since learned that's not sauerkraut. And
No.
so, when you make your own sauerkraut, oh, it just like all the other examples we've given today, it just tastes incredible. And so
Yep.
now I almost always have a jar of sauerkraut in my refrigerator to put on whatever I'm going to be making. If I want to add sauerkraut to a bratwurst,
Yep.
it's from sauerkraut that I made from my own cabbage. In that video, I actually bought the cabbage, but
Mm.
now I grow the cabbage to make my own sauerkraut.
Now, I got one question because I grew up. My grandmother was German. I grew up on making like probably about 30 gallons a year we used to
Okay.
make. But did you notice a change in taste from the store bought uh, cabbage that you use to the homegrown? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, the cabbage that I was using for all the years that I made it was the typical green cabbage that comes in the
Mhm.
big heads, and it it has a flavor, but like most things, it's muted. There really
Yeah.
isn't much flavor to it. And so the cabbage that I grow, actually, of course, different varieties that they're not selling in the store and has
Yeah.
so much more flavor, just as raw cabbage. So
Mhm.
when you turn it into something like sauerkraut, it's incredible. Napa cabbage is my preferred cabbage nowadays. I start growing Napa cabbage to make kimchi, but instead I make sauerkraut out of it because that's easier than making authentic kimchi.
Yeah. Lily wanted to know if you use purple cabbage.
I'm not I don't. I'm not as big a fan. I don't like the texture of the purple cabbage, quite honestly. And
Mhm.
so, there are some foods that we all like and some foods that we don't like. And for me, there's a couple foods like that. Lima beans are that way for me. There's just
Mhm.
something about the texture of purple cabbage and lima beans that I just can't eat. So I don't.
Mhm.
So I don't grow those in particular.
Well, have you ever tried sprouts?
Mhm. Yeah. Try,
Have
like,
you
to eat or grow?
both because
Okay,
the
yeah,
reason
I've done both, sure.
I'm asking Scott is most people if they took the sprouts, if you took different seeds and you sprout them, you take that, mix that in with more water and spray that on because each seed has a different biology that exists on the outside and the inside of it.
Mhm.
It's like planting that seed into your grow bed. So if you did 10 different ones, that's 10 different biologies that you can add into a soil structure in a matter of minutes. And it was just something I wanted to point out to people is you can do this and quickly add biology in that way.
Interesting. So I've grown sprouts for eating,
Mhm.
without necessarily thinking about the soil structure, but I've done exactly what you're talking about, with cover crops,
Mhm.
with bags of seeds to get
Yep.
them to sprout, and lots of different varieties in the mixes with the intent of turning those plants back into the soil. So,
Yep.
yeah, and I never really thought about that as sprouts and the different components of seeds, but that's exactly what it is as
Yep.
far as improving the biology.
Well, because your cover crop, you could be using it in a multitude of ways. You could be using it
Mhm.
as banker plants for pests, etc. But most people, it's a matter of, like you said, putting it back in to add those components like your dandelions for calcium. But you can take all these different seeds that, okay, the dandelion seed, it's the biology is designed, it's going to gather more and more calcium, but all you really need is the biology to be in the soil structure, not necessarily the plant itself.
Sure.
The plant's just what's holding the calcium at a later state, but it's the biology that goes into that sand, silt, clay, and organic material to gather the calcium to put into the plant. So if you've got a tomato plant that loves calcium and you put in all the biology that is specific for drawing calcium, your tomato plant's going to get all the calcium it could ever want.
Absolutely. And one thing, particularly with tomato plants, and this is one of those things that it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine with the quick remedies that people use to make their tomatoes grow better, and it's always seeming to center on calcium, because blossom end rot is a very common problem with tomatoes, and that's a calcium deficiency. But as we already talked about, most soils have plenty of calcium. It's the ability of the plant to use those nutrients and take up those nutrients and work its way ultimately to the blossom end of a tomato. And so watering is the culprit in almost all cases in home gardens. Overwatering or underwatering essentially shuts down that conveyor belt of nutrients into plants. And so if the roots aren't able to absorb the nutrients because it's a dry soil, or if they're not able to absorb the nutrients because they've been drowned in a saturated soil, then that calcium is not going to find its way into the plant. So burying eggshells is not going to help. Doing,
No.
any of those other things like grinding up chalk and, trying to get calcium, those kind of things really aren't going to work. But there's so much information out there suggesting that it will. You just have to understand the biology. And so the water is so critical to biology at all levels. And specifically for the plants, it needs to be the correct amount of water so that the biology between the soil and the plant is in balance. And all those nutrients actually can find their way into the plants.
Well, and the key of the too much water to the lack of water, your biology is going to go into cyst, right? So it's not going to be able to do its work. Overwatering is killing it because most of the biology that lives on top is aerobic. It needs oxygen.
Yeah.
You can't putting too much water in, it's drowning. So you're creating your own dang problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, it's a lot easier to control in a pot or a raised bed if you understand how to water and how not to overwater. Because most people, it's overwatering. They love their plants. They want them to grow so nice.
It's my baby. Something's wrong. It needs more water. Yeah.
Well, like for indoor plants or plants in a pot, what I like to do is I'll put in enough water to get runoff. Then I'll wait 45 minutes. I'll keep the runoff in the tray and allow the plant to bring the moisture back in to wick it back up.
Yeah.
After 45 minutes, though, I'm going to dump out any excess water, because any longer than that, then you get into having too much and you're going to start damaging your biology. But that 45 minutes, if you can do that and be consistent, you can water every day, and you never have a problem because your moisture content is proper to keep the biology active without it going into cyst, and you're not overwatering because you're not leaving the water to sit.
Yeah, and that's a great technique, because it's that stagnant water at the bottom that is there, and the soil will continue to wick until it is saturated. And when it's saturated, that's when it's going to kill the feeder roots. Absolutely. In addition to all the other soil biology.
Mhm.
And so, occasionally it doesn't happen as often as it used to for some reason, but I get the question, why does my pot smell, or why does my soil smell? And it's like, well, that's because anaerobic bacteria makes everything smell bad. So
Yep.
it usually is traced down to something like a pot sitting in the saucer of water, and anaerobic bacteria has taken over, and everything begins to suffer
Yeah.
at that point.
Well,
Yeah.
and that happens to so many people in so many different types of plants, because it's like, I know that it's a big thing in the cannabis groups, because they love their plants, and they're always watering, and they're having this consistent problem because of a lack of understanding. That's where, Scott, the education you're giving to people, whether it's any type of plant, it applies to all
Yeah.
plants,
Yeah.
not
It really
just
does.
one plant. People need to get that.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a big reason why my channel has been so successful is, even though I live in Colorado, I do
Hmm.
not tell you or anybody else how to grow plants in Colorado.
Hmm.
I just have videos that tell you how to grow plants.
Yeah.
And so you could be in Scotland or South Africa or Chile. And if you understand how a plant grows and how to develop good soil, then you can have a garden. And so,
Hmm.
my global audience on the Gardener Scott channel is able to grow globally from the same information that
Yeah.
I have coming from my Colorado garden. And
Hmm.
nothing against the channels out there that are telling how to grow in their specific region, but when they show how to grow in their specific region and then imply that that's the way you should do it,
Hmm.
that's when the disconnect comes in. And I always caution my viewers, in addition to anyone else I come across, don't trust everything I say. Don't assume that
Yep.
what I'm telling you to do is right for you.
Hmm.
Am showing you methods for how to grow plants
Yeah.
and telling you how the science works in the soil biology, but find another source, find somebody else out there. And what you'll probably find, if it's a research based channel,
Hmm.
is the information is the same. And so now all of a sudden you've got two or three of your favorite gardening channels that are all saying the same thing about how to grow plants. That's when you can start learning and maybe modifying some of your practices, because you weren't necessarily using the appropriate information for what's best for you in your garden. Every garden is unique. And
Yep.
so you've got to learn what works best for you. And it's those fundamental methods that really make the difference and allow all of us to learn more and ultimately have the
Yep.
best garden we have. Mala's back. She's telling
Yep.
me that she needs to get her evening snack.
It's treat time, Dad.
Yeah,
Uh,
Dad, I've seen a few people comment about the dogs on the channel,
yep.
and the clocks in our dogs' heads are pretty amazing. Uh,
Oh,
so
yes.
so yeah, Lily is exactly right. Listen to a
Yep.
lot of different voices, and then find what resonates with you. Absolutely, and
And that's
that's
what I
where
say
you
all the
should
time.
proceed.
Yeah. And it's so important. Like, that's where, Scott, you've mentioned a few different people, a few different, you know, um, sources of information, that can teach people, that can be those voices. Like, you look at Dr. Elaine Ingham, we've mentioned
Mhm.
her earlier. She's got videos going back for decades, presentations globally around the world, to
Yeah,
Harvard, to Yale. Go watch those videos,
yeah,
listen. you know
they
that's
are.
what I did.
I love her videos. Now,
Yep.
they are, lectures, and they're at scientific symposiums, and
Hmm.
they're dry, and many people would consider them very boring. But if you really want to learn, I
Hmm.
completely agree with you. she and so many others that are much less famous have very boring videos that are just packed with information if you're willing to sit through and take notes with that
Yeah.
good information.
Well, and what I did, because of having so much time from being injured, is I just went from one video to the next. I just put her name in YouTube, and all
Yeah,
these videos started
I
coming
did
up,
the
and I just
same
started
thing.
watching over and over and over, because
Yeah.
each presentation was a little bit different, yet the core points were always the same. And so it's stuck in my mind. I'm a very uh, that's how I learn, is more visual than a dry textbook. But it's, listen, guys, to those voices. If you're not sure, listen to more. Like, there's always information. Like, but I want to jump back, Scott, because we were talking, or you were talking earlier, about the grasshoppers, and how you have the plants that are surrounding your garden. And you just mentioned the different zones. If you're in Venezuela, it's going to be a little bit different than in Canada. The growing, having the plants around you, you're creating what the French call terroir.
Uh-huh.
And everybody's terroir is a little bit different. If you're growing on a south facing side of a garage compared to a north facing side, it's going to be different. So how do you've got your banker plants, are you creating your own zones in your garden to have a little bit different growing, how, there's a term I'm looking for and it's not coming, zone for humidity, for
Yeah,
shade, etc. Are you doing that?
microclimates, is that what you're
Microclimate.
thinking of?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to develop my landscape with rooms in mind. So I have the area directly behind me is my primary vegetable garden. Behind that, I have a little mini fruit orchard with
Mhm.
8 fruit trees growing. In another section, I've got 16 different types of fruit bushes. Uh,
Mhm.
and in another area, I've got a pollinator garden where it's really focused on the flowers. All around my garden, I've got the native grasses and native plants that are growing that I allow. Most people would look at them and say they're weeds, but no, they're just plants that are growing in a different area and they have a different purpose. And
Mhm.
so I have a pretty orderly structure to these different rooms within my landscape, but
Mhm.
it's all with that basic thought in mind that they are all helping as an aggregate to the whole
Mhm.
by attracting birds, insects, and anything else that is going to be beneficial to my garden. And within each of those areas, the soil is actually different because
Yep.
of what I'm using for mulch, and if I did any amendments in the soil to begin with, and then what plants are growing, because that's going to impact the soil as we've already talked about. So it's like my analogy with the combination pizza. My whole
Yeah.
landscape is a big pizza with a lot of different ingredients, and
Mhm.
so I have one plant that is just outside the gate of my fenced-in backyard, going to uh, the my garage and driveway,
Mhm.
and it's a native plant. It always suffers. It's growing in a small patch of ground between the concrete and the house,
Mhm.
and it is always weak. So we were talking about the plants that get attacked by pests are the weakest.
Yep.
That plant every year in early spring is devoured by aphids. The aphids find that plant and go to town on it. A week later, the ladybugs show up. And
Yep.
every year, that plant basically brings in the ladybugs for the rest of my garden because that one bush will have hundreds of
Mhm.
ladybugs to deal with the thousands of aphids.
Yeah.
And so that's one example of a plant in a far back corner that is benefiting my entire garden because it's stimulating that population of ladybugs that
Yeah.
can then spread and deal with everything else in the garden.
Well, I love that you use IPM and not sprays, and that IPM, guys, is integrated pest management. If you don't understand the term, I know I use WCA, water soluble calcium. The acronyms can really, people can go, well, what the heck does that mean? But it's so important to have that biodiversity. Now, the wife just came down and said that, if his dog needs treats, maybe it's time to end the broadcast.
Yeah, and I hear the puppy chewing on something else now. So this is
Well,
probably a good time to go ahead and
yeah.
get it in. I could talk these subjects for hours, but we'll save it for another day.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for coming on. Everybody in chat, thank you. I know we didn't really get into questions, but I can't monitor the chat as much as I'd like to. But as I said, Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate what you do, not just for your coming on here, but for everything you do. I know you go to a lot of different channels and speak on a lot of different channels. So, guys, follow Scott. All of his links are in the description. But other than that, Scott, I'll let you have the last word.
Okay, Ken, I appreciate it. Thank you for asking me to be here, and I do appreciate the opportunity. It is just the idea, and we've mentioned this already a couple times that, and you and I were talking a little bit about it. So I'll kind of return back to some things we were talking about before we went live, and just the idea that this is all a journey. Everything we're doing in our life is taking us to a point that we don't even know what that point is going to be. And I had a career in the United States Air Force for 20 years. I never imagined I was going to become a gardener and that I was going to become a gardening educator. And so it begins by just taking that first step in a direction that interests you. And then, like, both Ken and I have this habit of going into that rabbit hole and finding out as much as we can. You don't have to do that. Just learn a little bit more every day. Try something new, particularly in the garden, and you will benefit from that. And there are so many studies and so much research, like you were talking about hands in the soil. That's backed by research that the hands in the soil will affect how you feel. And even in the middle of winter in my Colorado garden with snow all around, I make videos and I film me standing in sub-zero temperatures in my garden and talk about just standing in my garden refreshes my being. Even when nothing is growing, the space that I have developed is that important. And so that's where I am. That's where my path has led me. And I think everybody can achieve that through gardening, at least at some level. And I hope that you do.
Guys, he's saying create your own Zen garden.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. We'll see you on Monday with Dr. James White and Leighton Morrison on the Soil Matters Monday afternoon. We'll see you guys there. Bye, everybody.